Jason is going to give his testimonial. So go ahead, Jason.
Okay, sure. So I'm 38 years old. I grew up in an Episcopalian church. I was an altar boy or an acolyte. I served there for a few years of my life, my young life. I knew all the lines. I knew when to jingle the bells, and I even prayed to God. But it wasn't until later in life that I realized I didn't know Jesus. I know who he was. I knew who he was, but I didn't know him personally. It took somebody casually looking me in the eye and saying, "Hey, do you love Jesus?" And I just said, "Yeah," because I knew that was the right answer. But I knew in my heart that it wasn't true, and I wanted it to be true. I'd been seeking God. I'd been pursuing God my whole life. But I didn't grow up as a virtuous young man. I grew up leaving a path of hurt people behind me. I grew up serving myself. I mean, that's not to say that I didn't do good things. You know, I served 12 years in the military, in the Army, in the Air Force. I did 2 combat tours to Iraq. I've served in the Forest Service, on the heli-tac crew. I've served as a paramedic and a fireman until I was medically retired from that. I lost my father at a young age. Before that, my grandfather was murdered. And I was asking the question that so many people ask of, why me? How could you let this happen? How could you let bad things happen like this? So suddenly I guess I felt like I was unique and special and bad things weren't allowed to happen to me. And one day when I was laying in Iraq in 2011, I heard a voice I was by myself in the room, and I'd been spending a lot of time alone because of my mission there. I was in special operations, and just kind of crying out to God for answers. The whole time, in retrospect, realizing there's this entire book of answers that I wouldn't open and look for answers in. But I'm crying out to God for answers. And one day I hear a voice in the room, an audible voice with my ears, and I hear the voice say, "How do you expect to see me when you're hiding behind my throne?" And I didn't know what that meant at the time. And so I just knew, though, I need to cement that in my memory, because at some point that's going to have meaning. And it wasn't until about 10 years later till somebody looked me in the eye and asked me if I loved Jesus. And that at that moment, that's when I knew where to go look in the Bible. Because at that point, up until that point, the Bible was like this matrix code to me. I just couldn't understand it. I would look in there, I would look for answers, but I was looking for the answers I wanted, not for the answers that God had for me. And so it was in that moment that I knew where to go in the Bible. I said, I need to learn about the life of Jesus. I need to learn about the man. Because you can't just choose to love somebody. You can't just say, oh, I know I'm supposed to love that person. I love them. I wanted to love him, but I didn't know him. So I knew, okay, I need to go find out who Jesus is and what he did. And when I read about the life of Christ, what he taught, what he said, and then what he did for me on the cross, that is where I fell in love for him. And I want to serve him. And I happened to find that person that asked me, do you love Jesus, at a course where I was learning to combat human trafficking. Wow. And so up until that point, I'd sort of been serving myself and my own ego, even as being a fireman and things like that. I was just trying to build myself up and serve myself and my own ego. And then at that point, I knew exactly where I belonged in God's kingdom, to serve his kingdom. Because up until that point, I felt like I had all these skills, but none of them were applicable to life. And my wife and I had even had conversations about that. And so then when I learned about who Christ was, that was when I surrendered to him. I acknowledged my sin and my brokenness, and all the parts that I didn't want to acknowledge, that I wanted to hide from not just the world, but myself, and just not to even acknowledge that I had done those things and that I was those things. But in Christ and what he did, I realized I could be washed of all of that, that there was nothing that I could do that was bigger than what Christ did for me on the cross and when he rose again. And so that's sort of my, like, in the nutshell, testimony of coming to Christ. And since then, I've found my place in his kingdom. Now where God has led me is I am using all the skills that he has built me up with in life, and he's called me to rescue children from human trafficking. And so now I am getting to serve alongside some of the most elite people in the country, to go to the most darkest, scariest places, which is what I asked God to do, to rescue his children from there. And I have never felt more at home, and I have never been more healed of all of my wounds, because before that I was a hard father. I would yell at my kids, and I would yell at my wife. I just had a lot of anger in me, and I didn't want it, but it would just come out. And through my love in Christ, not just the love, but the grace that he gives me, it allows me to give grace to others. I never thought I could forgive certain things, like the man that murdered my grandfather. But if Christ can forgive me, who am I to not forgive others? And so when you come to Christ and realize that you are who he made you to be, and that he loves you, the real you, who you are in him, you're completely set free. And it's literally like the chains are just broken off of you, and you can walk freely of all that bondage that is attached to you from birth. And so I love Christ, and to live in Christ and to die is gain. And so I just every day I don't walk in fear anymore. I don't walk in shame. I walk in humility and grace in Christ. So struggling, if there's somebody out there struggling, I encourage you to just get to know who Jesus is as he was a man and what he did in life. And if you don't know where to start, just go read the book of John in any Bible. Just go find a Bible. It doesn't have to, and I recommend reading one that you understand the language of. So a lot of people are turned off by like the King James version and stuff because of all the these and thous, and you don't have to read that. Read one that speaks to you in your heart, and read about the life of Jesus.
Yeah. Okay, I do have a question.
Yes.
Did you figure out what he meant by hiding behind the throne?
Yes. So yeah, I'm glad you asked me that. So my whole life I claimed to be a Christian. So that in and of itself, I was taking God's name in vain. I was claiming his righteousness, and I wasn't cleansed. I wasn't that.
You weren't walking it.
I wasn't walking in it, and I wasn't walking in humility before him. I wasn't presenting myself before him, because when you present yourself before God, you are completely naked. He sees to the depth of your soul, every thought, every desire, everything. He knows all of it. And so I was hiding behind God, like I'm a Christian, I'm good, but I wasn't standing before him in humility. And so that is what I have looked back on and feel like that is what he meant by that. So I think that's what that was. Is I was being a coward and hiding behind him and saying I'm a Christian and I'm of the winning team, but I was not saved. I would have, if I had died in that state, I would have been one of those that cried out, Lord, Lord, and Christ would have looked at me and said, depart from me, I never knew you. But by his grace, I got to come to surrender to him before that day of judgment. So
thank you so much, Jason.
God bless you.
God bless you too.